Was a 5-year-old kidnapped to later be forced to marry her abductor? Was she then forced to have a child with him that was later murdered? What happened to Suzanne herself? Was she murdered? Was it an accident? Decades that this girl had to survive with the man who had abducted her. You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I am Brooke Makenna and I'm so thankful that you are here. This community is incredible. We call ourselves the Genuine Gems and we really like to focus on the victims and the survivors over the monsters and the perpetrators. So if that's something you would like to do as well, go ahead and subscribe down below. We also have a Genuine Gem newsletter where I can send you my videos personally when YouTube forgets to do so. And a quick thank you to our sponsor, Quince, who allows me to continue sharing these stories. Now, Quince is actually the combination of two of my favorite things, which is premium quality products and affordable prices. Quince is now my one-stop shop for everything, including clothing, home goods, essential items. It's luxury without the markups. You see, Quince only works directly with top-tier manufacturers, cutting out the middleman entirely, which saves you money. Basically, their products are 50% less than what you'd find for similar brands, but I recently picked up a strapless European linen maxi dress in white that I've been wearing all summer, along with this Italian sling bag in cognac, which I've been taking everywhere. I don't think I've ever got myself a bag that's such high quality, and with Quince, I was able to without the sticker shock. They truly seem to focus on very timeless pieces made to last. So you can upgrade your wardrobe, your home, your high-end essentials from Quince. Just go to the link in my description and get free shipping and 365-day returns. Now let's get back to the story. So in 1975, a 5-year-old named Suzanne Marie Sevakis was kidnapped. Her mother, Sandy or Sandra Chipman, had 4 children. The eldest was Suzanne. She had had Suzanne at 17 years old with a man who was fighting in the military in Vietnam, and they had gotten married but would later divorce. And she then married a second man and had 2 girls, Allison and Amy, and 1 boy named Phillip together. But after they divorced, she ended up moving to a trailer park in North Carolina with the kids. And after a tornado tore apart their home, Sandy was said to have a bit of a nervous breakdown. She went to an adoption agency and tried to give her kids a better life, but the agency told her to basically go get counseling from a local church. So she was a single mother looking for help when she went to this church and met a man named Brandon Williams. He offered to marry her, to adopt her children, to be a support system for her so that she would not lose her kids. So that is exactly what they did. And by the next year, when her oldest was 5 and her youngest Phillip was 6 weeks old, Sandy was actually in jail for writing bad checks. During those 30 days in jail, her children and her new husband would vanish. Eventually, 2 of Sandy's girls were actually found to be dropped off at the local social services agency by her new husband. So they were staying in a local orphanage. However, her oldest Suzanne and her youngest Phillip were nowhere to be found, and neither was her husband. Her husband never returned. It was like Brandon Williams never existed. When Sandy tried to file a missing persons report for her children, she was told that Brandon was their stepfather and it was within his rights to take them. So no searches were conducted at all. But skip to 19 years later, in 1994, there was a kidnapping of a 6-year-old boy who would vanish in Oklahoma. Michael Anthony Hughes would vanish from Indian Meriden Elementary School. He had been living with foster parents at the time and was a first grader. A man had actually walked into his school, held a gun up to the principal, James Davis, and told the principal to take him to Michael. He then abducted both of these individuals at gunpoint into the principal's pickup. Now, 5 hours later, Principal Davis had actually been found tied to a tree in a nearby yard. And a month later, the pickup that they had taken was found, but no one was inside. So a warrant was, of course, filed for this kidnapping. The principal told the police that the man came to his office stating he was the father of Michael Hughes. This was believed to be a man named Clarence Hughes, but now Clarence and Michael were gone. However, 2 months later, Clarence was arrested in Louisville, Kentucky. However, Michael was not with him and he refused to talk about it. But Michael's kidnapping would lead to helping solve Susanna's kidnapping from 2 decades prior, as well as a suspicious death, but this wasn't a simple answer. We'll break this down. Between these two kidnappings, in 1990, there was a woman who was brought into a hospital in Oklahoma City. This was a 21-year-old named Tanya Hughes, who was allegedly struck by a hit-and-run driver. She was brought in by her husband, and she would die 5 days later from those injuries. Her husband, Clarence Hughes, was the prime suspect. He had taken out an insurance policy on his wife the same year. While he was a prime suspect, no evidence was actually found against him, and since he and Tanya had a child together, he was now the sole parent. So, after her death, Clarence would actually take the son, Michael Hughes, that he claimed to be his biological son, and give him to Oklahoma State welfare officials. Then Clarence vanished. This was all 4 years before Clarence was said to have kidnapped Michael. So investigators in Oklahoma City, after Tanya had been hit and killed by this driver who were looking into Clarence Hughes, they realized that he was on the run. And they really thought that he could be connected to the death of his wife. However, they found that this man was not who he claimed to be. It was believed that Clarence decided to originally leave Michael with the state officials because he knew that after his wife's death, everything would come out. The truth would be exposed. Clarence was not his name. Through fingerprint analysis, they actually revealed that he was Franklin Delano Floyd, a federal fugitive. He was wanted since back in 1973 before Suzanne's abduction. He was a convicted felon in Florida who had actually escaped parole in 1973. But Franklin had quite the criminal history and quite the upbringing. He was born in Georgia, the youngest of 5 children. After his father had died from kidney and liver failure, those children were placed into a children's home. He was said to be bullied there for being too feminine, and he was also allegedly SA'd by the other boys. At 15 years old, he ran away from the home. He broke into a nearby house for food, and the children's home decided to call one of his older sisters, who was an adult and married at that time, to tell her that they would not press charges as long as she took custody of him. So Franklin was taken in by her in North Carolina. However, eventually he was kicked out of even his sister's home, and that's when he began to search for his mother. He would find her working as a sex worker and had her forged legal documents because he wanted to join the U.S. Army, but he was underage. He would travel to California for this and then be discharged because he was lying. So by 16 years old, he broke into Sears to steal a gun, and then a shootout occurred, ending in him being shot in the stomach. He had survived this, and he went to a youth institution for about a year. When he was released on parole, he violated that parole a year later. So by 18 years old, Franklin returned to Georgia and worked at the Atlanta International Airport. But this is also the year that he would be convicted for kidnapping and child SA, and was sentenced to serve 10 to 20 years after abducting a 4-year-old girl from a local bowling alley and SAing her in the woods. He said he didn't kidnap her, but she was abandoned by her drunk and drug addict mother. He was then sent to the state hospital for psychiatric testing, and while being taken out of prison on medical leave, he escaped and he fled to another part of Georgia. There, he ended up robbing $6,000 from a bank and was convicted of robbery. He tried to escape again and was transferred to a medium security U.S. penitentiary. Eventually, he found his way back to Georgia State Prison and was released in 1972. On January 27, 1973, he approached a woman at a gas station and forced her into her car, attempting to SA her. She escaped, and Franklin was arrested once again. He had a previous cellmate, post his bail for this, and after that he went on the run. He had been on the run ever since, with investigators unable to locate Franklin Floyd. They now knew that that was because he was using the alias of Clarence Hughes. But when it was found that Clarence was Franklin and was a fugitive, he was arrested. He was sent back to prison in Georgia to spend the rest of his sentence. So from about 1990 to 1993, Clarence, or Franklin, was in prison. But when he was released in 1993, he began to plan the abduction of his and Tanya's son, Michael Hughes. When Franklin was found, After the abduction of Michael, without Michael, he told police that Michael was alive, but he would not tell them where. But as investigators began looking deeper into the life of this man, they realized that Clarence Hughes was not his first alias. You see, Michael, the boy abducted by Clarence Hughes, was the son of Tanya Hughes, who was actually Suzanne Sevakis, the girl abducted by Brandon Williams. They were the same man, Clarence Hughes and Brandon Williams. He was a father to both of them, Suzanne and her son. This man was believed to have committed 2 kidnappings 19 years apart, but for 2 completely different reasons. Clarence Hughes, who refused to tell the police where the 6-year-old Michael was also another missing man named Brandon Williams, who had vanished with Sandy Chipman's 5-year-old Suzanne and 6-week-old Phillip 19 years prior. You see, back in 1973, when he was on the run, he had actually met up with Sandy Chipman. Father of Sandy's children would say that Sandy met this man at church and she was crying over possibly losing her children, and he offered to help. So Brandon Williams, or Clarence Hughes, or his legal name, Franklin Floyd, then disappeared with her oldest daughter and youngest son, and Sandy was never able to see them again. But Suzanne had not escaped her abductor. And soon enough, the truth began to unravel. Franklin had taken this 5-year-old Suzanne back to Georgia and renamed her Sharon Marshall. He identified himself as Warren Marshall, her father. Suzanne was alive and well, being raised under a different name by the man who abducted her. Those who knew Sharon Marshall in Georgia stated that she was intelligent, she was beautiful, she was well-liked, and mature beyond her years. They stayed in this area, the same area, for her entire childhood, and nobody realized that she had been abducted. Sharon attended Forest Park High School in Forest Park, Georgia. She was in the gifted program, the ROTC, and wanted to be an aerospace engineer. She even received a scholarship to the Georgia Institute of Technology. Her high school friend would later say that Sharon knew that her father would never let her go. No one knew what a monster this father actually was behind closed doors. Suzanne was being essayed her entire childhood. Suzanne was said to get pregnant around this time and was forced to have this child and not go to college. She was then forced to put the child up for adoption as well. Then Sharon and Warren Marshall, father and daughter, vanished from the area, and it was found that they had actually moved to Florida under new names. While in Florida, Suzanne was told by Franklin that she was going to become an exotic dancer to make money. Suzanne then became pregnant once again, and at 17 years old, Suzanne gave birth to her son. Her father then married her, the child he had abducted and raised. They were now going under the aliases of Tanya and Clarence Hughes, making their son Michael Hughes. Suzanne then got pregnant with a little girl and placed her for adoption. But prior to Suzanne's hit and run death as Tanya Hughes, the family was living in Oklahoma. Suzanne was still working as an exotic dancer and would often be told to leave her husband. The fellow dancers didn't know that he was her father or that her abductor, but they did know that he was domineering. She allegedly told them that he threatened to kill her and her son if she ever tried to leave. Franklin was even said to try to join the Fraternal Order of Police to use connections to track her down if she tried to leave. Suzanne may have been an adult at this time, but she was not free from this man. In 1990, after 15 years under the watchful eye of her abductor turned father turned husband, Suzanne tried to run away with her son Michael when he was 2 years old. She made a plan with a man that she was actually having a secret relationship with in April of 1990. However, that would be the same month she was found lying on the side of the road after being hit. Groceries were scattered around her. Police believe she was struck from behind by a hit-and-run driver while walking back from a convenience store to a local Motel 6. She had several bruises and a large hematoma at the base of her skull. When Franklin was called to the hospital, he claimed he was asleep at the motel and she had gone out for groceries. But now, His whole identity was revealed, but they still had no evidence that he was the one who hit and killed Suzanne. But when Franklin was freed in 1993 and went to abduct Michael, he realized that the girl that he had kept hostage for 15 years was now dead. So he wanted to go and abduct their son, Michael Hughes. Michael had been in the care of foster parents who stated that he was nonverbal at this time. He often experienced hysterical behavior, but he was making progress. He was 2 years old when he came to them, but the mental age of 9 months old, so he was a bit behind. But they had even started the adoption process, which involved establishing paternity. It was at this time that Franklin Floyd was found not to be the biological father. But this didn't stop the abduction. His foster parents would say that they thought that they had seen Franklin driving past their house several times after they cut all ties with him, but CPS did nothing.
My view was I would rather him be dead than living somewhere in torment, suffering, wanting to come home, couldn't, being a prisoner, whatever. I'd rather him be in the arms of Jesus and with Jesus in heaven than going through whatever it was he would be going through, because he'd know that he was taken from us. He'd know he was being held against his will. He'd be going through all this. And I'd just much rather him be with Jesus.
You see, just prior to the abduction, when Franklin got out of prison, he was trying to get custody of Michael. But he was told about the paternity test, and this was denied. And that's when the abduction ensued. But now Franklin wasn't talking. Many witnesses had different stories about what had happened to Michael. Some said that Franklin allegedly confessed to killing Michael. His sister stated that he had told her that he had drowned him in a tub in a motel the night of the kidnapping. Some stated that they believed he was alive, but they just didn't know where. So Franklin Floyd was arrested on kidnapping charges at this point. He was charged and sentenced to 57 years in prison. However, he was also charged with murder, and not the one you're expecting, not of Suzanne and the hit and run. You see, in 1997, an investigation into another case had begun when a truck had gone to an auction, and a mechanic was looking at this truck in detail when they found a large envelope stuck between the truck bed and the top of the gas tank. Inside, 97 photos were found, including women bound and severely beaten. This truck was traced back to none other than Franklin Floyd, who had abandoned it. But one photo was a woman who was not Suzanne, but she appeared to be in a horrific condition. She was identified as 18-year-old Cheryl Kameso from Tampa, Florida. Cheryl had worked as a stripper at a local club with Suzanne. They would hang out often. They were friends. She would even go over to Suzanne's home. But Cheryl had vanished back in 1989, a year prior to Suzanne's hit-and-run death. Neighbors claimed she was a former beauty pageant winner, and one of her dreams was to model for Playboy. Witnesses claimed that Franklin told her that he could help her do that. Franklin would film her and Suzanne topless, saying that he would send it to the magazine. Several of their co-workers claimed that they had seen Franklin be violent, with Cheryl punching her in the face in a parking lot after an argument. They were allegedly arguing because Franklin accused her of reporting Suzanne for misstating her income, and this caused Suzanne to lose government benefits. Immediately after she disappeared, Franklin and Suzanne disappeared as well, and the trailer that they lived in was burned to the ground. Cheryl's remains were found in March of 1995 near a freeway on-ramp near Tampa. The bones were sunk into the marsh, and her clothes were ragged from years of rain and mud. But for 2 years after that, it went unsolved. Her remains were matched to her photos based on pieces of clothing, jewelry, and personal items, as well as consistent injuries. Her family also identified the photos as Cheryl. It was determined she had died from gunshot wounds to the head and had a skull fracture to her cheek. It was theorized that the murder occurred at the home of Franklin and Suzanne. Other photos inside the envelope showed evidence of Suzanne's essay all through her childhood, as early as 4 years old. But for the trial of Cheryl, by 2001, Franklin Floyd was ruled to be incompetent to stand trial and was ordered to undergo mental evaluation. Franklin actually fought this, and it was reversed. It was believed that Cheryl was murdered between March 13th and June 16th of 1989. Her parents stated that she had left the house at night in April and planned to spend the night with a friend and was going to call them the next morning, but she never did. Her Corvette was found abandoned, and her family finally reported her missing. Investigators had found that Franklin had called a coworker of Cheryl's and demanded that she give him the address and the phone number of Cheryl, where she was living, before she vanished. He threatened to hurt Cheryl for hurting his family and stated she would regret her actions. The month after Cheryl vanished, Franklin told a neighbor that he was going on vacation and asked if she would mow the lawn and collect the mail. And the day after they were supposed to be home, their trailer burned down. He called the neighbor and asked her to burn all their mail, and they never returned. But one of the photos of Cheryl from the envelope in the truck showed a image of someone's thumb in the actual photo. This was compared to Franklin's thumb, and the FBI found 9 common characteristics and concluded that they could not exclude Franklin as being the thumb. In other photos, there appeared to be a young girl fully clothed but provocatively, and a woman named Helen Hill Keller testified that these photos were of her 8-year-old daughter. She had never seen them before, even though Franklin had taken other photos of her children and gave those to her. She said that when she was subpoenaed, Franklin sent her a threatening letter not to testify. Franklin then testified himself that he suffered SA since he was 5 years old at the orphanage and later when he was imprisoned. He stated that the photos in the envelope were not his, but planted by someone who beat this woman up, but she was not Cheryl. Franklin was said to shout insults and profanity at the judge, who threatened to have him gagged, and the prosecutor stated that Franklin Floyd was one of the most evil people she has ever met in her life. She stated that Cheryl may have died simply because of friendship. But in 2002, after 4 hours of deliberation, Franklin was convicted of first-degree murder. When this was announced, Franklin looked at the jurors and said, "Look me in the face. They framed me." Cheryl's family wanted the death penalty, and this was granted. However, Michael Hughes remained missing, and Suzanne's death remained a mystery. In 2013, the FBI and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children conducted a review of the kidnapping of Michael Hughes. A year later, Special Agents Nate Furr and Scott Lobb interviewed Franklin in a prison. Franklin Floyd was on death row at this time. He told the agents that he did in fact take Suzanne back in 1974. This was confirmed with DNA samples. After 24 years, Suzanne Sevakis was found. She was Tanya Hughes, who had died in the hospital. But her death was something he would not talk about. Franklin then told investigators that the day he kidnapped Michael was being a typical 6-year-old boy. He was out of control and crazy in the car. Franklin said he just ran out of patience and shot him twice in the back of the head, making it quick. Franklin said he buried Michael near the last interstate leaving Oklahoma. That area was immediately searched, and no evidence nor remains were found. It was believed his remains were eaten by feral animals. In January of 2015, Franklin actually pointed out the area on maps where he buried Michael, and the FBI's response team sifted through 2,000 square feet for 16 hours. They theorized that wild hogs that roamed the woods would have probably already eaten the bones.
Retired agent Scott Lobb.
We're introduced to Franklin Floyd. He did not know we were coming. We're meeting Franklin Floyd for the first time. I didn't think much of him, honestly, when I first saw him. Somewhat frail now. He's in his 70s. But his mind is still sharp. Started right off on a rant. We hadn't even introduced ourselves at this point. He thought we were attorneys, and he had a 2-inch thick stack of papers pertaining to his appeal of the murder conviction, and he went on a 45-minute rant about how he was ramrodded, how his life is unfair, how he didn't do any of these things he's in jail for, that he was going to win on appeal. And I identified myself. And then went on a rant about the FBI and how the FBI had screwed him over on the Michael Hughes case and how Joe Fitzpatrick had planted evidence. And we had to let him go again for about another half hour. And towards the end of that morning, I told Floyd, I said, "Listen, I want to tell your story." Of course, I don't believe any of these things I said, but I said, it does appear you have been screwed over by the FBI, by the prosecutors. They made up the story for you, and they told a story that apparently wasn't true. Let me tell your story. You tell me, and I will simply write down what you tell me. And at about that time, Floyd closed his eyes and he starts telling a story about sitting in his truck stop, meeting this girl who wanted to meet him, and how good he looked in uniform. He ultimately opens his eyes. He's looking at me with a very conversational tone, is telling me that he dated this woman for 2 weeks. She had 3 children. They ended up getting married. It was, kind of a whirlwind courtship. Well, what name were you using? And he says, Brandon Cleo William. I said, well, tell me more about Suzanne. He knew where we were going with this. He made some type of comment. Well, this is the girl you've been asking about. And Floyd was not going to talk to us about Michael Hughes at all. He made a lot of statements that pointed towards Michael being dead, pointed towards his guilt. He at one point told me, I have been in for 20 years for something I didn't do and something I did do. And I should be freed because of the law, not Michael. And I looked at Floyd and I said, are you telling me you never took Michael out of the state of Oklahoma? He looked at me with this quizzical look. And I said, hear me out, Floyd. I said, just hear me out on this. If you didn't take him out of the state of Oklahoma, you can't be charged for federal kidnapping. You got to cross state lines. You know this. Let's talk about what happened to Michael. He's essentially admitting to Michael's murder without saying, I killed him. I asked him, I said, was Michael a burden to you? And he says, no, he couldn't be a burden. He wasn't with me but a day. And he asked a question of one of us. He said, what's in it for me? Floyd starts making comments. How he got him emotional was talking about Michael and how you were obviously a good father. Michael was doing well. And, none of the stuff we believe, but some sniveling, I call them crocodile tears. And he finally looked at me and says, why do you want to know where a dead person is? I replied with, where's Michael? He said, buried, huh? And he starts to cry. Floyd, how'd you kill him? And he's ignoring me. He's talking to himself. And at one point he uses, some of Jesus' last words on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? And at that point, I slammed my hand down on the table, my voice a little more raised. How'd you kill him? He looked at me and said, don't you do that. I startled him. And I started asking him over and over again, how'd you kill him? How'd you kill him? Floyd, how did you kill him? And Nate's asking, where is he? Where's the body? And so forth and so on. And he finally looked at me. Waterworks came off. He turned and looked at me and said, I shot him twice in the back of the head to make it real quick. Michael's father he lives out, last I heard, he lived in Oregon. And going back some time here in this convoluted story, I believe he had met Sharon, in the Phoenix area. And they had gotten pregnant and had this kid. But, at one point, Floyd had also reached out to him and asked if he was willing to take Michael and raise him, which he was. But ultimately, Floyd never called him back again.
But what about Suzanne's missing sibling, 6-year-old Phillip, who vanished as well? Well, for years, no one knew if he was alive or what had happened to him. Franklin was not believed to have taken him with him. He hadn't been dropped off at an orphanage like his 2 sisters, Amy and Allison. However, in 2019, a man believed that he had just found out that he was baby Phillip. You see, investigative journalist Matt Burbeck, who wrote a book about this case back in 2014, claimed that in 2019 he received a message from a man named Steve Patterson. He wrote, "Hello, I have a question for you. I think I may have been in one of your books. My dad died last Sunday, and my adopted mother told me my real last name last night. This all sounds strange. I just need some answers and think you may be able to help me." Steve said that he was born and lived in North Carolina, and that his father died in March 2019, and his adopted mother, Mary, told him his real name was Phillip Brandenburg. She told him that she had met his mother, Sandy, when she was at the hospital and Sandy was giving birth to Phillip. Now, Mary had actually lost her pregnancy, and Sandy was having her 4th child. They met. Sandy was said to be pretty distraught. She didn't know what to do with 4 kids, and Mary, of course, was grieving the loss of her own. So a few weeks later, she said that Sandy showed up at her door with Phillip in her arms and said that she was leaving town with her new husband and her 3 daughters, and she could not take care of the infant. Franklin Floyd was said to be there too. Mary took Phillip in and never saw Sandy again. She decided to raise him as her own and named him Stephen. After a DNA test was conducted, it was confirmed that this was missing baby Phillip. He began to have contact with his biological family, including his sisters. But this book had also helped to identify another member of this family. A girl named Megan Dumfries had started reading this random true crime book, not realizing she was a part of it. Her adoptive parents recognized the woman on the cover as the woman who had given them a child to adopt. Megan was Suzanne's daughter. Her adoptive parents said they met Suzanne and Franklin under different names, and Franklin just wanted the money for the adoption. When they went to pick up Megan, they asked Suzanne if she wanted to see her daughter, and she said no. She said that Franklin walked over, the whole conversation stopped, and it was very odd. A year later, Suzanne was dead. Megan's DNA was a match to Suzanne. She was her daughter. Suzanne's biological father, Cliff Sevakis, has actually reached out to Megan, and so she has been able to get to know her grandfather, Cliff. Cliff has said he can't talk to Suzanne, but he can talk to Megan, and that'll do. But Megan's birth father is unknown, and it is believed to be Franklin Floyd. Megan said no one should have to go through that from a stranger, no less a father or a father figure in her life. That's the part I don't like to think about. The more I learn, the angrier and sadder I got about everything. But she is now married with 2 children, one of which she named Michael after her lost brother. But on January 23rd, 2023, Franklin Floyd died of natural causes in prison at the age of 79. Do you believe all the answers have been given in this case? Were all the right questions asked? Is there more that we could have known if we pressed Franklin? Did he have more to tell us? How many aliases did he go through? Why did he do this? What in the world led him to look at a 5-year-old girl and say, I'm going to kidnap you and later make you my wife? Why was he so obsessed with Michael Hughes being his son enough to kidnap him? Did he believe Michael was biologically his and it was actually Suzanne's secret relationship she was having? From the little things that people have said about Suzanne over the years when they knew her under an alias and they knew Franklin Floyd as her father, it was that he was very controlling. She was not in control of her life even as an adult. She knew exactly what was happening to her, I believe. I think from a young age, this girl probably knew that she had to survive, and she did whatever she was told to do so. And my heart absolutely breaks for her. Do you think she was killed in a hit and run? Do you think Franklin was even the one at the motel? I was theorizing that it was her boyfriend that was waiting for her in the motel and that Franklin had come and actually mowed her down with his car when he realized. But because of the book A Beautiful Child, which I will have linked down below, they have since come out with a documentary. I believe it's on Hulu called The Girl in the Picture. And so incredibly insightful. Highly recommend. This case is absolutely disgusting to think about. And the big question here is why? He was obviously not in his right mind. That was for sure. But it's crazy to me that because this man posted bail, he was able to do so much harm throughout his life. Do you think that these days this would have worked, considering that an alias was used to put a child through school and multiple different aliases were used to get this abductor through his life? I don't think that it would be as easy today, thankfully, to just hide behind a fake name. But how terrifying that he could. But thank you so much for listening. I truly appreciate your support. Don't forget to click the link in the description to get Quince for free shipping and 365-day free returns. Don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay. Bye.